I want to start and say thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to meet you here today and to be a part of this start of a great project. It sounds fantastic and really exciting. Congratulations for having this opportunity to work together. So my name is Anne-Kathrin Peters, or Anne-Kathrin Peters. I'm German. I'm working now as an associate professor at KTH, Royal Institute of Technology, with sustainability education, especially equality and social justice. That's my formal introduction, but I want to start with my personal story into all this. You might wonder, why technology education? Shouldn't we have someone with more broader scope here? Well, I started around 2000 studying computer science. I was in that study program, and I was thinking that computing technology is shaping the way we think, the way we live, the way our societies change. And I wanted to understand this and responsibly being a part of that. But then computing didn't really make sense. I dropped out, I came back, and it didn't really seem meaningful to me. So I became a teacher in mathematics and computer science. But then I also realized I didn't understand this. There was something weird about technology. So I became a teacher. I learned how students are, or I saw how students are socialized into a very narrow mindset doing technology, also contributing to major changes in our society. So that then, and I worked on equality. I saw that women might have, for example, difficulties becoming a part of it. But I also thought that this is very problematic from a sustainability point of view, where our society is screaming for more technical competence, more women should study computing. But then computing didn't care about the world. So I started to learn from different research communities about sustainability, in the community of future studies. I took years of leaving my disciplinary boundaries of computing and education, learning very broad about the issues that we're having. I established the sustainability initiative at Uppsala University. I was asked to lead the climate change leadership initiative to think about change and leadership, and worked with developing a large research application, for example, with several universities and also civil society organizations. So I have learned a lot about sustainability and was quite shocked and honestly quite anxious and sad about the state of the world. As Kim Nicholas, professor in Lund, writes, the state of the world, knowing that we'll reach 1.5 degree warming within probably about a decade, which means that we're having high risk of reaching tipping points. That would mean large-scale change in our systems, is depriving sleep. It's causing me sleepless nights. But it's also I also feel hopeful that this is an opportunity to not only work for less emissions, but to rethink the way we live today and establish a new way of living together, and to think about education and its role for creating a better society. So my main focus has become more and more education and change. I'm now working at the KTH with the teachers there to think about how we can work with sustainability, not just integrating competencies, but rethink education. And I'm also working with the teacher students to think about schools. Yes, so today I want to think about change with you and talk about change. Why is it so hard to change our society? And what could we do in our schools and universities to contribute to change? And I want to start with this article that is on its way to be published by very well-known climate scientists. Kevin Anderson, the climate change leadership professor from a few years ago, for example, Carrie Faeser, who was then the next climate change leadership professor that I also got to work with and that I think you know, and you might be part of this project. But they are asking, 3 decades of climate mitigation, why haven't we bent the global emissions curve? And they look at this from various perspectives. So something we should learn from this is that we have known about the catastrophic climate impacts since 1990. But still, emissions today are 60% higher than they were in 1990. And what they say is that the narrow techno-economic mindset is the fundamental problem. And that I can very much relate to, having looked at what we do in technology education. And also the broader society discourse. We need more of technical competence and then in this education. And I show you a little bit more about this, being so little done on sustainability. And they say what we have known for a while and what also the IPCC has said in 2018. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. That if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, that number comes from the Paris Agreement, that requires rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of our society. So, what could be the role of education? First of all, I also want to say how, and that's also something the article says, that we need to think equality and climate change together, and that is not done enough. And I can also see that when I look at my research, we're thinking about women we need more women, but we don't think about the broader societal challenges that we're facing. If we look at emissions, about the richest 1% are currently emitting more than the poorest 50% of the people that are living on our globe. So it's highly, very much an issue of inequality. Also, those who are already suffering are the poorest, and they are not or hardly contributing to emissions so far. Yes, and we can also see that suffering is already happening now, and even if we manage to reach this 1.5 or keep within 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2, we know that there will be a lot of suffering happening. It will get drier. We will have more natural disasters. So we don't need to only mitigate, but we also need to become more resilient and learn to kind of protect our communities. Yes, but of course, and as I already tried to say, we're having many complex interrelated challenges, and we're not only facing climate change. The Living Planet report from 2020 concludes that the findings are clear. Our relationship with nature is broken. So I've been talking about global challenges, climate change. We are exploiting nature globally, but I also think we need to think about what we can do locally. How are we treating each other? What inequalities exist in our communities we live? Sweden is segregated, even though it's a very wealthy country. How do we live with nature, and how do we come to appreciate nature? So these are a bit of the dark and sad stories, I think, we're telling today. But there are also other stories to tell. As Carrie Faeser, for example, says, these times are not just characterized by trouble, they are also and equally characterized by ingenuity and exploration, by invention and reinvention of ideas and old ideas. So I think that is something we should hold on to and also tell our students. These are very exciting times. We are in a position and situation where we can and are called to change and think about the ways we want to live together. Also, Kim says these are exciting times. We are changing our societies now. We should think also that we are living in times of change. So I propose we should ask fundamental questions together with our students. How do we want to live and care for each other and for nature and for other than humans, the animals that are around us? What can be the role and purpose of universities and schools, of research and education? And how can we use and really develop technology in a different way? We're talking about digitalization, but how is it really helping us as a society? I'm bringing this question up because I think there is quite a focus on technology. So then I think we need to think about how we really use it and what we use it for. I am really inspired by a program called Connected Communities, which is actually also led by Carrie Facer in Great Britain. The reason why I'm inspired is because it is asking us, or it is about what we can do locally to contribute to sustainability and to become more resilient. What are the communities we are part of, where we can learn to live with each other and care for each other? And how could schools and education institutions become a part of this and contribute to meaningful activities and to development towards sustainability and resilience, thinking about and promoting more sustainable ways of living? And what could be the role of researchers in this? It could be to allow to find answers and find questions that are relevant for these communities. Yes. Also, I think what is important is that, as I already also pointed to, is that climate change is only one challenge along many other challenges. And what we do to contribute to climate change needs to speak to the other local challenges that we're facing in communities, for example, poverty or inequalities. So I'm wondering, what communities are you a part of, and could you develop through your school environments, for example? Yet, I can see that universities are developing also in a different way today. We're talking a lot about standardization, defining curriculum, and also universities are increasingly drawn into a neoliberal discourse. Universities more and more needing to contribute to the global knowledge economy, producing graduates that can serve in the global market. Students, and I have analyzed policies for higher education, and I was quite shocked. These students are not seen as citizens or human beings, but rather as raw materials that can be formed and shaped to fit industry needs, and materials in some kind of a production process, or also consumers in a market, but that should make the right decisions, of course, in their trajectories. But, so this is a bit depressing, but I think we should also keep in mind that higher education institutions have some choice in how they enact these policies and possibly resist these policies. Where are the empty spots that you could do something different? And students also vary in the extent to which they take up, negotiate, and resist policy discourse. So I think we need to see that we also have agency to call for change and support the students to resist these dominant discourses. I want to give you a very concrete example of how students get shaped and produced in this higher education from my own research, because I also want to point to another problem that you also were mentioning, Eva. In my research, I was very curious to see how different students would make sense of IT, because I was struggling making sense of IT, and I was struggling to see it really as meaningful. So I followed different students through their education, and I chose very different students to follow. Like, for example, a student who was very interested in politics, and he had almost finished a study degree program in politics. He was then entering computing because he was thinking he wouldn't get a job only with this political background. So I was really curious about how this student would make sense of computing, someone who was really interested in politics. And in the first year, when we met, I met them every year, he was saying, well, the connection between computing and politics is obvious. Computing is changing our world, so I can do computing in a different way compared to someone who doesn't understand politics. And I thought, yes, that's true. And I was really curious, how would such a student then develop and use computing? Well, when I met him in the second year, he wasn't talking about politics anymore. And I asked him, what happened last year? You talked to me about politics. And he said, well, no, I'm not thinking so much about politics anymore. Now I'm mostly interested in back-end programming, the really technical, the difficult problems. It's hardly noticeable, it's hardly visible. You do technical, the back-end. And then I was thinking, okay, maybe later on it comes, because the first courses are very technical, and then in the third year they take the human-computer interaction course, introducing human aspects. But at that time, the students were so indoctrinated, oriented towards these technologies, that he then said, no, I don't want to combine this anymore. I think one misses a lot when combining politics and computer science. Political science is about discussion without getting anywhere. The only way to come to a point of right or wrong is to look at reality. In computer science, it often feels like I want to do a slightly better solution. Can I do this algorithm slightly faster? This is a theoretical, a natural science discipline. One can always test the solution in a very small, secure environment. So what I can see is that we are reproducing silos in universities, and it's not like this one example. It is one example demonstrating and showing quite clearly what I see is happening in our higher education. We're producing silos, and the students are not reflecting on this. And also we're like producing competencies that are useful to go into industry, like doing these technical competencies, but not being critical about what we actually are doing. And these students, having studied, are likely to get into management positions once they come out. But change is on its way. We wanted to talk about change, and in many universities we're currently pushed to include sustainability, or we are really believing and working with sustainability competencies. The United Nations have had a decade of education for sustainable development, as you probably know. But they say that it is of major importance to learn about sustainable development, because without learning for sustainable development, we won't create this paradigm shift that is needed. We should integrate the principles, values, and practices of sustainable development into all aspects of learning and education, which is also something you were showing us. All individuals and societies must be equipped and empowered by knowledge, skills, and values. that empower them to contribute to sustainable development. I think this is fantastic. This is really exciting. On the other hand, I can also wonder, how will this happen? It doesn't talk about norms and values. I think we really need to engage in these norms and values and think about how we can work with these competencies together with the students. Also, if we think of the students that are out on the street, many of these students know a lot about sustainable development. The youth are leading the climate movement to some extent. We can call them as leaders in this movement. So what then would education for sustainable development actually mean? How can we do this? Many youth or young people are quite desperate about and anxious about what's happening, asking action. And now we're standing in the classroom telling them to learn about this so that they in the future are capable of contributing, which is when it is too late. I mean, we shouldn't think of things being too late, but we need to change society today. So then maybe we should be working together with them and think about change happening today, which would mean that we rethink education as not being about learning, but also acting today, possibly contributing to community development. Also, we need to think about emotions and take those seriously, which is something I think we're not used to doing. Many young people are very anxious and sad about what's happening and hopeless also. How do we deal with this? And Maria Oyala says that hope is a positive emotion and an existential must that needs to be cultivated. We cannot only tell about these depressing stories that I told you in the beginning, because many young students might also already know about this. We don't really know what sustainable practices might look like because we are to create them. So then that really questions how we can understand education and do this. And I think we need to include students and question power relations in the classrooms. We need to do this together. So we need to cultivate hope by showing that another way of being is possible, by encouraging trustful relationships, and by giving young people the opportunity to concretely work together for a change. So then it might be learning by doing. And here I think again about the communities we're engaged with that we can perhaps use as a context to work with the students. So what I'm saying is that then education needs to be reconceived, not only as something being about learning certain given competencies that are defined by some people, but that are defined by all of us, also allowing for agency and novelty. So we can understand education as going beyond curriculum, training, and qualification. And there is some people who have been writing about this, like Anne-Kathrin and Biesta, who have developed a term called subjectification, which is about the individual coming into the world with the environment being other peers, the teacher, but also local community, for example. We need to give the students a sense of agency and hope. And Deborah Osberg says that education can be a place in which students meet and that allows students to experience and experiment with the possibility of the impossible. So we can, and that comes from future studies, educators, diverse people come together and are allowed to think about what the sustainable futures could look like. So we're not, and that is then an orientation towards the future, we're not only thinking about what is going wrong now, but education can be a place where diverse people come together and think about, so what should then sustainable ways of living look like? How do you want to live? And allowing students to experience and experiment with the possibility of the impossible or not yet imagined. So here education can be innovative, inventive, creative, giving agency, and really utilizing that we have such different experiences and backgrounds in the classroom, like a political science student or a student interested in arts, using them to tell stories about the future and the present together, using these different experiences and ideas. And it can be quite playful. Deborah Osberg suggests an political theory of education, where it could be kind of, education can be understood as something political. Students are invited to think about the future. What should life be what should look like? But education can also be playful. No decisions need to be made. So all can be invited to imagine life in a very open and experimental way, which I think is quite inspirational. Finally, or not finally, but I want to say that there is so much exciting happen. There are educators who are experimenting and opening up their classrooms, which really gives me hope. And I want to tell you about two stories that I can see, my personal stories, and I would be really curious to hear about your stories and experiences from your classrooms and schools and environments. So, for example, I have been teaching in a course called IT and Society, where students are working with a hospital. And the hospital then comes to our classroom and says, we wonder, for example, how can patients be made more involved in their healthcare processes? Giving a really open-ended question. And then we encourage the students to think about their questions, their concerns, their experiences that they can, and ask them to use them to work or for the hospital and with the hospital, talking to nurses, doctors, talking to politicians and patients. So we really encourage them to build on their diverse experiences and see learning as something that emerges as the students engage in conversations among each other, with us and the hospital staff, which is quite, I find very beautiful, because the students really take leadership and ownership, and I'm every year amazed by what the students come up with. And I also see that the students need support, because sometimes these students are very insecure. It's very different. They can't handle these non-instructions. They are asking for, so what should I do? And we say, we don't know what you should do. Do what you find meaningful. And then they might even say to the hospital, we have found you should do like this. And last year we had the hospital saying, no, this is not important to us. Do this. And then we said, no, you seem to have good ideas. Continue following these ideas. And then in the final presentation, the students were able to argue for the same idea, but in a better way, since they had worked with the hospital. And suddenly the hospital said, you are right. We should really work with this. And now this project has become this year's class topic. So the hospital kind of got a new question from the students and brought it to the next course, to the new students. So I think we can really establish processes, joint collaborations through education. But of course, the challenge here is that this is a very open course. It's difficult to argue for the value and what students will learn, which doesn't quite fit into this dominant discourse of we need to describe and curriculum and really exactly describe all the things that the students should get out of it. And the students also ask for, they want to have these courses where they are explicitly said what they should learn, how to pass the test. So actually we have mostly exchange students in these courses. Our students who are very interested in the technical competencies, they don't see this course very valuable, which is another, again, a question of norms and values. How do we socialize our students in education? Is it about ticking boxes, or is it about becoming a part of like joint meaningful action and learning, really taking responsibility also? Another example is what I am now a part of, and it's developing at KTH, where we work with challenge-driven education, and that is meant to be complex societal questions with actors outside of universities. Again, that then students work together with these external organizations or partners. And here we work with the Swedish North, who are wondering how can they make education more meaningful, collaborating with us on challenge-driven education, which is what we have a lot of experience with. So we are now also thinking about creating digital classrooms, connecting people in the north of Sweden, where a lot of sustainability transitions are happening now, around energy and these things, but students moving away. So they have difficulties having students there who are like, drawn towards the bigger cities. So they are interested in making relevant education, creating relevant education that is not only relevant for the students, but also for local development, which I think is quite exciting. But there's also things going on in schools that I could talk about more. But I think you might have wonderful stories to tell also. So what have I then talked about today? Wrapping up, I ask you, what environments for change are you part of? What environments do you want to engage and contribute to making it fruitful environments? What environments could you create? Who are the people who you could be working with, who perhaps share your ideas of education, or possibly my ideas, and which of course are ideas that many others also share, other researchers. I really encourage you and us to think about fundamental questions. How do we want to live and care for each other? What might we create in the futures? If we can't think of inspiring examples in the present, we should think about the future. And what is the role, the purpose of education and universities? How can they be most relevant in these times of change and crises? And then I have talked a little bit about perspectives, conceptions of education that I think are a bit, rather not dominant yet, rather marginally, but they exist and people experiment and play with these conceptions of education. Seeing learning as emergent as we engage in climate action, for example, or action in local communities, beyond training that which we already know, allowing for new ways of knowing to emerge. I have talked about the value of education as a democratic learning space, inviting various people to come together around not only shared matters of facts, but shared matters of concern. And I really think that education institutions needs to reconnect to local communities. We cannot teach out abstract knowledge, talking to these young people who might be very anxious and see the need for urgent change as everyone sees. We need to create and cultivate hope through joint action. that's what I thought I want to tell you and talk more about. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And please sit down there so we can reflect on what you have been saying to us, and perhaps we have some comments or questions. And of course, we have someone online too that perhaps will say something. So please feel free to reflect on this that Anne has told us.
I want to ask you a question. What change do you yourself see needed if we are going to survive?
I think we need a deep relationship to nature, and we need to really learn to value nature, and I think that's really important. And somehow I think our society orients more and more towards technologies. When I see my son being in first grade now, and every kid gets an iPad, learning there. I see the point that young kids already need to kind of learn to live in this technical or digital society. I see that need, but I also think it is so important to really get connections or connected to nature, and see the value and really vistas in naturen. So really, be out and also learn in and from with nature. I think we need various classrooms. So I think that is something really important. And then, of course, we need new lifestyles, radically new. Most of us, I think, are in a position that we emit way too much, like 4 times as much as we should be. So we need to cut, and that's, I think, sometimes I think there is like this dominant discourse that we need to kind of refrain from certain activities, and like this cutting, and we should kind of avstå. We should kind of, let go of lifestyles, and this could be kind of we should not have 2 cars, and that's something we should sacrifice for being able to survive. But I think it's also a chance to. It's not necessarily that it's about sacrificing. I think it is about thinking what is really important to us and living life that is more according to these core values, which I think, because I think no one or very few would say it is to have 2 cars or 3. I was cycling with 2 kids in a stroller. I don't have a car, and but I also thought thing takes so much time, and I can kind of feel maybe I should have a car, because then I can kind of keep up, and we can go dancing, and we can do this and that, as all the other, or so many other parents are doing. But I was cycling on Saturday, and it took a lot of time, but it felt so peaceful and calm and slow. And it was so beautiful, and like just cycling out in the nature. And I think changing the ways we're living is, there is such an opportunity to creating alternative ways of living that are, I think, will be much less fast-paced, like slower, and more peaceful. And that's at least my wish for this opportunity to radically change the way we are living. More connected to each other, to nature, and less value on consumption. Yeah.
But we are up against strong forces that are planning something else for future. I just said we are, I mean, of course, what you're saying is good, but we are up against very, very big forces that don't want you to cycle, that don't want you to be happy, that want you to crave for more cars and more clothes and more travels and more flights and more whatever. So we don't even have, I mean, we don't even have 10 years. If we don't bend the curve this year, we are doomed. And yeah, maybe someone else wants to be more positive.
Yeah, I mean, but I think, and that is also maybe about storytelling and what I said, like we have dominant discourse that we need to change, but these, and that might but marginal discourses or alternative discourses already exist. There also exists alternatives to universities. And Carrie Facer, for example, argues that if universities don't change and become relevant, then other institutions, learning institutions, might become more relevant for these times. So I think alternatives exist, and it also depends on the stories we are telling. And I think we just should see that we are in times of change, even if we are seeing it's too slow, but we know we need to change. And many people are recognizing that, and there are a lot of initiatives happening around the world. First, I was kind of starting to collect all the beautiful things that are happening, but of course, I could spend the whole day on that. And I think we can see that we have agency, and we have like the wind is blowing in the right direction. People are asking for alternative ways of living and change. So my hope still is that we will manage looking and seeing resistance, seeing new ideas, being creative together, and learning really to live together and with each other. Yeah.
I think what you said now is very interesting, since we are working with Storyline, which is about working with stories in school. And I totally agree. Our only chance is to tell another story. That is so important. So keep cycling and tell the story.
I could say something that is more hopeful, I think. And that is our children and the young people of today. I saw that students who they were in a storyline in a storyline, they were trying to learn to get to know a tree. And from the beginning, they saw the trees as not living organisms. And after 6 weeks, they saw the trees as their best friends. They hugged the trees and they wanted to be close to the trees, and they said that the trees are just like us. It's just that they can't move and they can't talk. Otherwise, they are just like us. And they were very hopeful. And I think this is some kind of hope for us to see that the children can change so fast. So seeing the trees from not living organisms to really friends happened so fast. So I think that is hopeful. And I saw something good too this year at Backatorpsskolan, because the children, they learned how to make or to imagine a future that is environmental friendly. So I think they are our hope. I just wanted to add that.
I think it would be lovely also if you share these stories through this project. I think that's the aim, right? The stories that you create together with the kids. Yeah, that can be very powerful, I think, for both those involved, but also for others seeing this, giving others hope who are not part of this project.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. Already when you were presenting, I was thinking about Joy Palmer's tree model from back in the 80s, learning in and about and for the nature. And mostly when I'm talking with teachers, and I ask them to tell what they are doing and what the children are learning about sustainable development, the ecology part of it, and they are telling about how they are putting lights out and sorting trash and that sort of things, and they don't remember to tell all the things they are doing, and the children are learning about these two other parts, learning in nature and learning about nature, and how important these parts are. The learning for nature is almost always something they are talking about, and in my way, they are forgetting the most important parts that I know they are doing, but they don't think that they are equally important about talking about sustainable development. And when we were telling about the course, the wonderful course about the collaboration with the healthcare, and I was again thinking it's important for me about the learning part and the learning aims, and how we are collaborating the learning aims for each course. I think we have to wrap up the courses and think and make the learning aims very clear and communicating at what are the learning aims. And I think this concerns all school stages, and not focusing only on knowledge things and things like that are easy to test, but equally about, or even more about, values and reflection and collaboration and that sort of things, and write them out, these learning aims, and communicate with the children, with the student, with the parents, and all parts, and lift up these parts, and hopefully the children and the parents and all society also learns that these things are equally important, that the knowledge part and the checking out boxes part. And yeah, that's my reflection.
Yeah. Then I also think, like, I have a project on emotions in, like, with computing students who learn then about sustainability. And yes, it is about it. You can have like all these like values and attitudes, and you can, but it's also, I think there is like there is one example of how like education is about going beyond learning and training, because I shouldn't be saying you should feel like that, but still, like, hope, how hopeful are they? How do they feel? How do they how do they feel when they come and learn about all this and engage? It is very individual, but something also that we need to think. We need to support them to handle those emotions and reflect, and I cannot like describe how they should relate, but and how they should be coping. So it's something I cannot define, but something that I still need to give support. And I think that's something we are like really not used to doing in our education, at least in higher education. I don't know, it might be different in schools. But yeah, so I have been thinking a lot about this. Also, the project is quite that they should be like emotionally competent. But what would that mean? And I think we're still missing something there that goes beyond being competent, but just being a living human being in all these times that we're having and that we're trying to talk to them about. So I think there are components in education and learning that we have thought very little about that are so important for being a human. And that's also something, another example how these times also give me hope, because I think it's really an opportunity to rethink about education, rethink education and learning.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think emotions are very tightly connected to motivation. Wanda.
Yes, I will add something about the role of the teacher. And I think it's about the relational pedagogical approach that you can use in the classroom, not only with children, but also at the university. Sorry. And that is to have a care for your students, that you really care about their health and how they feel, and also to combine that care with academic care. That you want them to learn something, but you also want them to be part of the society. So you have to have a civic orientation combined with this care, I think.
Yes.
And I think that is not so common in the university.
Yeah, I agree. I also, something that I would really like to talk to you more about, that I think is these disciplinary boxes that we force students to be in. Like even like in the schools, you might work with the students in the woods when they have this class, what is this called in your place? But then I think they might go on to math class or English class or whatever they have, and there it's like still very different and very abstract. So how can all this kind of get together? And also I think if education were to had really cared for myself, it would have given me much more freedom in learning. It feels like someone else always knew better than me what I needed to learn. And that's kind of can be explained by all these dominant discourse. But I had to learn programming, coding, like in the beginning. But once I kind of thought, no, we are living in crisis. I should learn in a way that makes sense. I feel I have also learned so much, but kind of what made sense to me. I think that would be more care. Why can't we give students, especially maybe, I don't know how that could be, you are the experts for schools, but much more freedom in learning what we think is relevant. I think there is this, educators can kind of have a view of students not learning enough or the right thing. But in these times of crisis, how can we say what the right thing is? I think we can't. Or maybe we can to some extent, but I think we need, and that's also like if we look at this education beyond training curriculum, I think we need to give much more freedom for ethical reasons, because to society's transformation, we don't know what it will look like. As you said, we should see that we need to change society rapidly and in all aspects of society in a very strong way. So we can't know what is needed in 10 years, what society will look like then. So we can't really say what is relevant to know. So I think students should be given much more freedom and should be seen more as partners in these times of change, developing this society and also reflecting on what's going on in the world.
We have Lea Kollner with us, I see, that work as a headmaster on Vittra. Do you want to tell us about your story at your school, how you work with your students? Or do you want to comment what you have heard? Can you go a little bit close to the microphone so we'll hear you better?
I just said that it was very inspiring to hear what you were talking about, Anne-Kathrin, and I think it's also really important to, in my position where I'm now, to start to see that change has to happen through education, that we can no longer just wait for someone to come and say, well, it will be fine in 10 years, things will change, but we are the change, and we have to make our students understand, and I think they're better in understanding that than we adults are, that we have to do something today, not one day in the future. And we did in the previous years many different projects like across classes. And then I was actually this summer, I realized that we have to be more powerful. We have to do something that we can reach out to the local community to start with and to make them being aware of that they are also important. And that's why we decided to start up actually with a storyline project this year as a whole school from F classes up to grade 6. And where we actually are making Sollentuna sustainability superheroes. And now this week actually on Friday, I've managed to get local politicians and people from the climate and environment department in Sollentuna, and also one pretty well-known baker in Sweden, Sebastian Bobby, to come to our school now on Friday to meet our students who will discuss and provoke and to share ideas for a better society and to think that, well, we can make a difference locally, but at the same time, this is something our contribution for the global change as well. And also, we are a school that have students coming from different parts of the world. And I see it also as something that they can take back home to their home countries when they visit their friends and like families, and discuss that openly. And I think, like you said, Anne-Kathrin, it might sound very depressing. It is very depressing where we are right now. And a way out is to do something about it, to act on it, and to talk about it, to let the students share their emotions, share their struggles, ideas. Because what throughout the whole storyline was very obvious that they understand it better than we actually ever will. So that's my part.
Thanks, Leah. It's very inspiring to hear what you have said, and you also have a prize, I think, about your work at your school, and I hope you will join us more in this project and tell us more about your work.
Thank you. It's very nice to get a nice prize as a school, and also that we have managed to get to top 5 Swedish schools to be the most is also thanks to storyline, because it has made us like find a way to really act and let the students to be a part of that.
Yeah, I think, thank you so much for sharing. I think that was really wonderful to hear. I also think, like, as you said, what was her name again? I didn't get Eva. Her name? Leah. Yes, like, as she said, students know so much. I think we also should, like, come together as colleagues to think about what we should do. I recently did a workshop at KTH to, like, collecting all the colleagues to think about future education. Like, what do we together, and we could do this, of course, together with students, but like creating collegiate processes of, like, of change. Like, where do we think we are going and should be going? What ideas do we believe in? And I think once we have kind of created futures that we believe in together, I think we can take steps also as individuals in different classrooms, and then kind of going together. So I think, yeah, we traditionally, educators, are in a power position, deciding what should be done and creating those spaces. So I think we are especially, we should be especially thinking also about ourselves, what we could do in these structures that we're part of. Maybe, yeah, it is at least as important as thinking about the students and what they should be doing. Yes. So I think that's something we can do. And also I think having students from abroad is quite interesting. So we are working with African colleagues from universities who were also part of this workshop. And I realized I had done this introduction talking about, the dramatic situation as we're in, but saying also that we can tell other stories of change and experimentation. And this is like part of this is what we're going to do. And then afterwards, after the workshop, I talked to one of the African colleagues who said, we in Africa, we're a bit behind. We are not maybe thinking so much about climate change. To be honest, we are still very concerned to have enough food. And I realized I kind of at that time failed a bit to really take in the different perspectives, silencing this person, not really seeing that. So I think we really need to work on how we create classrooms and learning environments where we really allow different people to come with their worries and their concerns, as I think like climate change is pressing, but it's not the only concern that we are having.
I think when you talk now, it seems like you are very much into storyline. It seems like storyline fits in everything you say, and that is very good. And actually, when you tell this about your African experience, I had a workshop with headmasters in Uganda, Swedish and Ugandan headmasters doing a storyline about sustainable development, and they were acting as citizens in a society. And what struck me there was that all the Swedish headmasters, they were thinking about environmental issues. And when we talked about sustainability, all the African headmasters were thinking about not having wives being beaten up, or not having enough food on the table, or none of them thought about what we were thinking about. But since we did it in storyline, that was okay, because in storyline you just ask what is the the key issues on the table, and then it comes, and that means that we can always explore what the students really want to talk about, and we don't have to say that this is not what we are talking about now. And I think storyline then can help us a lot in that, to just take out what they want to speak about, or if they want to be superheroes or whatever.
But yeah, I agree. I think it sounds like a fantastic tool to use. But I also was using something called causal layered analysis, which comes from future science, really allowing for different futures to be created together, and I'm quite aware of inequalities, as I have said. I know that the Africans there are hardly contributing to the problem, and but suffering the most. So I know about them, but still, I was really thinking about it. But it's so easy to forget, and then of course it's also good if we acknowledge that there are new ways of working, and we're all learning in this, and it's just natural to, I think, do mistakes, and then it's important to learn from it. Even though I feel like I should have thought about it, but we're experimenting. And then I think it's important to reflect together, and I think seeing those mistakes, then you can also think, or I can think, I succeeded somewhat still because I learned, and next time I think about it.
It's also succeeding that you got that person to tell. I mean, you have an open classroom if someone can tell that. So yes. That wasn't a failure, I think. It was a success in one way.
I can be a bit harsh on myself.
Good. We also have Slovenian with us. We have Katja and Mateja in Slovenian. Do you want to say something or tell us a little bit of your story?
Just let me close the door because it's a break here at school.
Yeah. And you have to go very close to the microphone so we can hear you when you come back.
Hello. From Slovenia. We got quite a few ideas how to connect the local community with school and with this project. And we wanted to start the project Storyline. I think that Katja already told you about it.
Yes, I have to say that actually sometimes teachers don't know how many different things process into education. You know, like we do so many small things, and we sometimes just forget that we are talking about sustainability and things like that. So I think that we are important, and we are the role models for the children, and sometimes I hope they do things like we do at school, at home too, so they can transfer all the environmental issues at home and try to save them in the same way or similar way as we do that at school. We are very lucky that our school is positioned in the middle of nowhere, if I can say that. We have a lot of forest, fields, and meadows around us, and we really try to live, work, learn, and teach with nature. So some of you already know most of our projects, and I think we can be very proud that we are working hard and we are trying, but there is still a lot of room for more things to compose into our education. Okay, to add anything?
Yeah, and you work with bees now. I know, and it's a project that doesn't need to have storyline. So this approach, we can use it, and we can also do many other things besides of that approach. So I think it's very inspiring to listen that we need to act, and we need to have the encourage to do something else in school than just do what the curriculum said in a little bit. We have another bit in the curriculum that say that you should work with this, and let that kind of stuff have more place in our school. So I feel that I have some uppmuntran to go further with this.
Yeah. Can I ask you another question? I think what is also important is to think about gender. That relates, for me, it relates to how we bridge difference, like nature, technology, or nature, people, and technology. Care as abstract, in contrast to abstract, because gender traditionally is also created around dualisms or difference. So what do you think, and have you thought about gender in any way in your project? Working, have you or have you not? And could that be interesting? And so one would be concrete on gender, but also how have you thought about differences and how you can bridge difference? And then, of course, you seem to have worked with and thought about cross-disciplinary.
Gender for me is that each person can do whatever they want to do without the gender. So when we work with imagine the future, for example, our children do an island, they can make their characters and think about he or her wants to do. And there you have the opportunities to discuss the gender problematic if there are any. So it's an opportunity for the teachers to let everyone become what they want to be, no matter gender. And of course, this is in a Swedish context where you can be everything. It's not so in the whole world, but we can think of what could we do if we want to do this and this in our lives. So yes, in Solway we work with gender in different ways, I think, in a storyline.
Because I could imagine it to be quite gendered. I mean, just listening to my son, who is 7 years old, I'm quite, sometimes I'm so worried and in thoughts, hearing him like talk about, oh, now I don't like pink. And then I know where it's coming from. It's like being socialized into. So and then I wonder, like, what are the stories produced, and how could you perhaps make sure that you're like producing different stories, allowing for different experiences to come in, and also seeing and possibly working with gender, reflecting. Yeah.
I think if every Swedish teacher were following the curriculum, we would be working with gender in every aspect. But teachers are human beings, so unfortunately that is not decided for anyone. It is, I mean, there is every possibility to work with this in storyline, and we have done so before. I mean, we had one thing where they created families, and then they had what transport vehicles were there in the family, and who is sitting where. And that was very typical. The man was at the steering wheel, and the son was beside him, and the mom and the daughter was sitting in the back, very often in the families. And then there is a very big possibility through the stories to really lift up that and have a discussion. But that always goes down to what teacher are leading the classroom. So if the teacher is aware and following the curriculum, that should happen. But I can't guarantee that it is happening in every classroom.
I think you could kind of perhaps try and look for stereotypical views, and because future studies, which is where I kind of got to know storytelling and where I put it in my mind, or storytelling in general, I think you can always ask for alternatives, like how could it look? What could it look like in a different story? What other stories can you imagine? And I think that's where like really creativity can come up, and also really change, and reflections and critical discussions. So as you say, but I would say that, yeah, you can call it maybe also stereotypes, but Jen, there could be something to look for, to not reproduce stereotypes. And also I think, like in general, power relations can easily be reproduced even though you're intending to do something else. But you seem to be aware.
We also have Carol Lamont with us from Scotland, that have been a principal and worked with Storyline in many, many years. And now you're a pedagogical consult with Storyline. Do you want to say something, share some reflections or questions, Carol? You have to put on your microphone, Carol. Yeah, we hear you.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Eva. And thank you so much for such a very thought-provoking presentation, and one for a lot of reflection. No matter how used I am to maybe writing a storyline or working with very talented colleagues, when I listen to presentations such as yours, Anne-Kathrin, I have written down lots of notes. Carol, look at this. Carol, pay attention. Or just the recent one you have brought up about gender. I think one of the things that the storyline approach has given us, it's collectively working with one another, taking on the things that are critical at the time when we're living. And one of the things that it does give, Anne-Kathrin, is in a storyline classroom, or as Lena was talking about, the whole school, it's also an attitude, it's a working together, it's mutual respect for the learners, for the teachers, the professionals, and working with parents and the community. So it gives us lots of opportunities, and we listen very carefully to what the learners are saying. And we're always in the storyline classroom that I've worked with for many years, with the youngest children to the oldest. It's about them knowing that I take what they have to say seriously. And when we have a big assembly, for example, we can talk to one another, and I will be honest with them. If they give me an idea, I will say, well, I think that could happen, but we need to talk more in depth about it. So it's that honest relationship with the learners and looking outside the box. I think you're absolutely right. We shouldn't be confined, unfortunately, in Scotland. Sometimes it is the case where the curriculum appears to be quite rigid, but it's for people listening to people such as yourself, Anne-Kathrin, and the group of people that you've listened to this morning, who are thoughtful, respectful, creative people. And we need to then think outside the box and make sure we listen, we give the young learners and learners opportunities to be agents for change and hope. Thank you very much.
How beautiful and exciting times you have in front of you.
Can you come and sit here? I can come. Public transport took a long time from the airport for me. But I have been thinking very much about this whole culturally dependent we are on our approach. When you brought up about your experience with Africa, an African perspective, I thought about that with the environmental perspective, because we in Norway and Sweden, I believe, we're very much into, we have to get out into nature, we have to, you know, touch it and be part of it. And I have colleagues that tell me, you know, their students or their pupils do not get outside of a concrete environment. You know, they maybe, if they're lucky, they're transported for one day into something that doesn't have concrete under their feet. So I'm thinking, how can I, or we as a group or as educators, make that connection to nature when nature is physically not near them? And that's when I put in the technical. Is there technology that can help with this? Can they become aware? So those are things that I'm back here thinking, yeah, those cultural differences are important for this project that we're in.
Where is that, where they don't get out?
The colleague I was talking to just a month ago was from New Mexico. New Mexico. New Mexico. I'm trying to think of what the name of the city was. And she was telling me about her husband's job is some sort of like a, what we would call like an outdoor school here. But the kids are just bussed out, and it's a one-day thing for the whole school district for this city, and that's what they get. And she said the kids don't know how to walk on grounds that are uneven. And it just hit me how very much we say nature and, you know, go out and hug a tree, but if you don't have a tree to hug, how are we going to help make those help bridge that gap for these young people that don't have that experience?
But I would think they still have some relationship, must have, to nature, and it would be really interesting to find out more about it before, like, thinking that they should do what we do.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm thinking too. It's a good question. How can we approach nature from a different perspective than from what where we look out and we live in trees very closely. So that's what I've been thinking back here about.
Interesting. We have also connections to Japan. I think that's also quite exciting that the word is really connected. So we talked to them, and recently I was kind of organizing that we would join Fridays for Future, and we were talking then to them, and we're saying that, how about Fridays for Future in Japan? And she was like, no, we don't demonstrate here. There's just so much pollution. We know, but we don't demonstrate. And that was also quite interesting to hear. I mean, they are faced with a lot of pollution, and there are many people dying from pollution, which we don't talk about those numbers. We have talked a lot about corona, but not about people dying from sustainability issues already. But yeah, so they don't go out because of pollution. And how can you? I think we probably need to be quite sensitive then, working together, thinking about nature in these different contexts. That must be quite a challenge I haven't thought about yet.
I haven't an answer either. It's more just hit me as how so often we assume from where we come from. And
yes.
And that's where I also, when I came in, you talked often about this relationship with each other. How do we take care of each other? And there is where I see could be an interesting connection, not to take nature or the environment out of the picture, but to start with the interrelational aspect first, and then that could be an easier touch. And I think that's maybe a more near entrance into this whole big picture of environmental or climate crisis.
Yes, and I also think taking care of each other, and then I think we can see that there is so great inequalities, and then it's there. You come into like all these crises are interrelated, but then you can think of how much do I really need to consume, and how come this person has so little, and what about my lifestyle, and you can contextualize it then with these broader issues of climate change, and how could we change, what should be other ways of living. Like I really like this storyline approach, also storytelling, and also I think thinking about the futures, thinking about futures, not the future, but futures, I think is really valuable.
I've been watching the films that you made at Backatorpsskolan, and I really like that when the discussion amongst the children there was what are the needs and what are the desires and what is the difference, and they had a really deep discussion there. Do we really need heated floors? Which is, I think, a very good thing, that you start to think about what are really needs and what are desires, because if we don't see the difference between needs and desires, we will never go the right way. And the students are actually, they were grade 2, and they were impressive, I think. Grade 2s that discussed this in depth. It was nice.
Okay. Shall we finish here? I think it has been a great discussion, and many thanks for you to come here to us. I hope you come back
I would like
in some way during this years. And many thanks for you that have been listening on the Zoom. We will have a little more information for us all before we end this event. So please stay still on Zoom. But many thanks to
Thank you so much.